So we now pass on to A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I'm going to hand over again to our actors. So this time, Richard and Derek are going to be the narrators. Angus is going to be Quince, Annabelle is Titania, and Mark is Bottom.
We all know what A Midsummer Night's Dream is about. It's about moonshine, magic, mischievous fairies, creating love tangles in an enchanted wood.
Actually, there's a little bit more to it than that. As you'd be surprised to learn who the rude mechanicals really are.
Well, if Titania, Queen of the Fairies, is a stand-in for Queen Elizabeth, as some traditional scholars have acknowledged, then who is Bottom?
Most scholars don't go that far. They can sense danger. How could an author who is a commoner dare to portray the Queen as being in love with an ass? My mistress with a monster is in love. Instead, they play safe. They recognize just one topical allusion to the Queen as the imperial votress, untouched by Cupid's fiery shaft. An entirely complimentary image, a tribute to her chastity.
So, what's the real story?
It's all mixed up in politics. In the 1990s. Let us go back a few centuries. In the 1570s and 80s, England and Elizabeth were in the greatest danger, threatened by Catholic monarchs abroad and Catholic sympathisers loyal to Mary Queen of Scots at home. In 1570, the Pope excommunicated Elizabeth and effectively sanctioned the invasion of England. It was to be reconverted to Catholicism. How to prevent our two greatest potential enemies, Spain and France, from forming an alliance and invading us. How to keep the balance of power. Simple. The Queen had to marry one of them. A match with Philip II of Spain was briefly considered early on in her reign, but this would never have been accepted by the people. In 1571, Lord Burleigh and Sir Thomas Smith, the English ambassador, agreed on a strategy. Their proposed solution, it was actually at the suggestion of his mother, Catherine de' Medici, was that the Queen should marry her youngest son, Francois de Valois, the Duke of Alençon. 5 of her children already had worn a crown. Why not Francois? And a French-English alliance would help to keep the Spanish in check.
So what did Elizabeth think of this proposal? Was he the perfect match?
He was hardly the handsome prince. He was less than half her age, 17 to her 38. He was under 5 foot tall, and with a hunchback. And his face was badly scarred and pockmarked with smallpox. But she was a trooper. She played her part perfectly. Not only did she appear to be in love with Francois, she also seemed very taken with his ambassador, Jean Simier. She flirted outrageously with both of them, to the embarrassment of Lord Burleigh and the indignation of Lord Leicester, not to mention the outrage of public opinion.
How long did she keep this up?
The whole farcical situation, there is no other word to it, was sustained over a period of 12 years. This was state policy. England's survival as a Protestant nation depended on it. On the one hand, it's a tribute to Elizabeth's skills as an actress. On the other hand, historians find proof of that her affections were genuine. When all hope of a match was finally abandoned, and Alençon left England for the last time, she wrote an extraordinary poem about him, expressing her deep grief over lost love.
So, what has all this to do with the dream? If we associate Titania with Elizabeth, is there anything to link Bottom directly with Alençon? Surely not.
Our first clue, the Duke's official title, as next in line but one to the French throne, was Monsewer. This was the honorific traditionally bestowed upon a younger brother when his elder brother became heir to the crown. In 1576, for example, he negotiated a treaty which allowed the Huguenots freedom of worship outside Paris, which was known as the Peace of Monsewer. He was known by this title in England as well as in France. The Queen's farewell poem was entitled Elizabeth Regina upon Monsewer's departure.
So, Alençon started off as the spare and later became the heir.
Yes. And in Act 4, Scene 1, Bottom manages, in addressing the fairies, to use the word Monsewer no fewer than 11 times in the space of 20 lines. Our second clue, to keep Alençon eager and sweet as a suitor, the Queen showered him repeatedly with bounty in the form of English crowns, in the end amounting to a total of £350,000, more than a king's ransom. And what is Bottom chivying the fairies to collect? A honey bag. A delicious pun on money bag. One third clue, but before we get to that, let's hear that speech from Bottom.
Where's Monsieur Cobweb? Ready. Monsieur Cobweb. Good Monsieur, get your weapons in your hand and kill me a red-hipped humblebee on the top of the thistle. And good Monsieur, bring me the honey bag. Do not fret yourself too much in the action, Monsieur. And good Monsieur, have a care the honey bag break not. I would be loath to have you overflown with the honey bag, Signor. Where's Monsieur Mustard Seed? Give me your neef, Monsieur Mustard Seed. Pray you leave your courtesy, good Monsieur.
What's your will?
Nothing, good Monsieur, but to help cavalry Cobweb to scratch. I must to the barber's, Monsieur, for methinks I'm marvellous hairy about the face, and I'm such a tender ass.
Yes, I see what you mean about all these Monsewers. I think we get the point. And that's what he said.
No, it doesn't. That's just rude.
And how strange when Bottom is supposed to be an Athenian. And then all that harping on about a honey bag.
Yes. And there's an even more precise link which has to do with spelling. The standard spelling of Monsieur, Monsieur, then as now was Mon. But Alençon's title was always spelt M-O-U-N with a U. Mon. Elizabeth's poem to Alençon is spelt like that. And that's how it's spelt. Unusually in this scene. But you won't find that spelling in a dozen other plays by Shakespeare. And then our third clue, there's what Bottom says about himself in Act 1.
Let the audience look to their eyes. I will move storms. I will condole in some measure. To the rest, yet my chief humour is for a tyrant. I could play Hercules rarely, or a part to tear a cat in, to make all split. This is Hercules' vein, a tyrant's vein.
Of course, there's obvious comedy in Bottom's braggadocio, comparing himself to the greatest of all mythological heroes, Hercules. But there's also a shaft at Alençon. Again, we have the odd spelling. In 14 other Shakespeare plays, it's spelt Hercules. In fact, later in the play, it's spelt conventionally. Here, Bottom says Hercules, imitating a French pronunciation. It so happens that Alençon's birth name was Hercules, Hercule. He was christened Hercule de Valois. But Hercule turned out to be a child so thoroughly un-Herculean, an embarrassment to his family. He was such a puny little creature. So when his eldest brother, Francois II, died, he was given his name and rechristened Francois. After that, he was known as Francois Hercule de Valois. Now, something else that flags up the French connection, our fourth clue, comes in Act 1, Scene 2, when there's a discussion between Bottom and Peter Quince about beards.
What beard were I best to play it in?
Why, what you will.
I will discharge it in either your straw-coloured beard, your orange tawny beard, your purple ingrain beard, or your French crown-coloured beard, your yellow.
Some of your French crowns have no hair at all, and then you will play barefaced.
So, what is all this talk about French crowns and no hair about? Well,
There are multiple layers of meaning here, and all of them sideswipes at the French. First of all, there's a reference to coinage. The écu was known as the French crown. On his first visit, Simier, the French ambassador, brought a present of 12,000 crowns to give to the Queen. The écu was made of gold, hence it was yellow. But yellow, of course, also stands for cowardice, to English eyes a quality typical of the French. Then there's a standard Elizabethan joke about syphilis. One of the symptoms of this was losing your hair. And one name for syphilis was morbus gallicus, meaning the French sickness. But hair, in Shakespeare, can also be a pun on heir, which brings us back to Alençon, because he was, after 1574, the heir to the French crown. What's more, the question of his hairlessness was notorious. In 1573, when Alençon was 19, Catherine de' Medici, his mother, felt obliged to communicate to Lord Burleigh that he was getting stronger all the time, all grown up, his face much improved, and his beard beginning to grow out.
so, Bottom as the hairy Hercules, the heir to the throne of France, the Monsewer who was interested in money bags. What about the names of the other rude mechanicals? Well, are there any clues there?
Well, we do have a Francois in France's flute. He plays Thisbe to Bottom's Pyramus, which could be construed as Alençon making love to himself. Just the sort of absurd joke that court insiders would have relished. But before we get to Snug and Snout and Peter Quince, there's something more to say in connection with the love potion. Oberon tells Puck that when Titania wakes up, she's going to fall in love with the first thing she sees. And he runs through a menagerie of creatures, including lions and bears and meddling monkeys.
Having once this juice, I'll watch Titania when she is asleep, and drop the liquor of it in her eyes. The next thing, then, she waking looks upon, be it on lion, bear, or wolf or bull, on meddling monkey or on busy ape, shall she pursue it with the soul of love.
As you know, the Queen loved to give people nicknames. Leicester was her Robin, sometimes her bear, and sometimes her lion. Burleigh was her Leviathan, Hatton her sheep, Alençon her frog. Simier was easy, an obvious pun on his name. He was her ape, her singe, her monkey. He signed his letters to her, à jamais le singe, votre, forever your monkey. Simier was indeed a meddling monkey. It was he who, to Leicester's fury, revealed to the Queen that her favourite had secretly married Lettice Knollys. From then on, he and Leicester were sworn enemies. Leicester made 3 attempts to have Simier assassinated, and all failed. On the third occasion, Simier complained to the Queen, who was outraged. She called Leicester a murderous poltroon. But Simier was supposed to have meddled in another way. Such was the effect on the Queen of this double flirtation. She doted on her monkey and her frog. She was a changed woman. The French ambassador reported back to Catherine de' Medici, "This discourse rejuvenates the Queen. She has become more beautiful and bonny than she was 15 years ago." The rumor ran that Simier was giving her love potions.
There's no need to be reminded of all the mischief brought about by love potions in the play. So it would seem that real events being played out in the English court were just as dramatic and ridiculous as Shakespeare's comedy.
Yes. And you can see how a playwright might be inspired to burlesque the whole situation. How ripe it was for satire. There are details of the courtship which find tantalizing echoes in the play. We know about these details from the gossipy reports made by various Venetian, French, and Spanish ambassadors at court, and from the meticulous records of events kept by Lord Burleigh. In October 1581, in private rooms attached to the Palace of Richmond, Elizabeth made arrangements for Alençon's visit. 2 chambers were furnished and warmed for his use. 2 of her lords, Howard and Arundel, were charged to make all the arrangements for his comfort. And Her Majesty herself superintended the installation of a crimson bed, which she archly told a French emissary that his master would recognize. The Venetian ambassador, Lippomano, reported back to the Doge that Elizabeth proceeded to visit the Duke every morning before he got out of bed.
Come, sit thee down upon this flowery bed.
Flowers certainly played a role in their courtship. In March, the Queen had written to him in French.
I thank you very humbly for the sweet flowers gathered by the hand with the small fingers, which I bless 1,000,000 times, and declare to you that never was present better carried, for the bloom remains on them as fresh as if they had been gathered this moment. Monsewer, I have taken care not to lose a leaf or a flower for all the other jewels I possess.
Despite these extravagantly amorous protestations, at various points in their courtship, Alençon realizes that he is being made a fool of, that it's all a political game. His mother, Catherine, warns him that he's becoming the laughingstock of the whole world. He resolves on an immediate return to France. The whole stratagem is in danger of collapse. The Queen must deploy all her charms and powers of persuasion, lovers' kisses, intimacies, caresses, and fondlings, as the French ambassador puts it, to win him round and buy time. He must stay. Remember the scene with Bottom, wishing he had wit enough to get out of his wood?
Out of this wood do not desire to go. Thou shalt remain here, whether thou wilt or no. I am a spirit of no common rate, the summer still doth tend upon my state, and I do love thee, therefore go with me. I'll give thee fairies to attend on thee, and they shall fetch thee jewels from the deep, and sing while thou on pressed flowers dost sleep. And I will purge thy mortal grossness so that thou shalt like an airy spirit go.
Elizabeth's delaying tactics drove Alençon to distraction. Here's another cameo scene. On this occasion, rather than threatening to leave, he threatens to stay. He seeks to force the issue. He refuses to leave England without Elizabeth promising in public to marry him. Here's Bottom's version of the situation.
I see their knavery. This is to make an ass of me, to fright me if they could. But I will not stir from this place. Do what they can. I will walk up and down here, and I will sing, and they shall hear that I'm not afraid.
One historian describes the episode. Alençon puts his back to the wall and plainly told the Queen that not only would he refuse to leave England, but he would not even vacate the rooms in her palace. until she had given him a definite answer as to whether she would marry him or not.
I will not stir from this place.
Will he come or will he go? Will she say yes or will she say no? It is a French farce. But you've hinted that there's more to be said about some of the other rude mechanicals.
Yes. Once you become aware of the French connection in this context, the name Peter Quince could hardly be more obvious. In the play, Quince directs the show. Well, he tries to, along with Bottom. In the marriage negotiations, it is the French ambassador, de Quince, exactly the same spelling, who leads the delegation to England in 1578.
But what about Snout? He doesn't sound very French.
If you translate his name, the word bec in French can mean beak or snout, and Dubex, B-E-X, was the name of one of Alençon's emissaries, one who accompanied him on his secret visits to Elizabeth. And then there's Robin Starveling. I can't help feeling that that's a stab at Shakespeare, at Leicester. He was the Queen's sweet Robin when she was well disposed towards him. And no one could have been more put out, more starved than Leicester in this situation.
So, to complete the whole scenario and come full circle, if Bottom is alias Alençon, and the rude mechanicals in some degree his French entourage, then Titania has to be Queen Elizabeth.
Which makes it more remarkable that not a single mainstream Shakespeare scholar has caught on to this, especially as Shakespeare was not the only one to allegorize the French match. Spenser satirized Alençon as an ape in his Old Mother Hubbard's Tale, and lampooned him in The Fairy Queen as braggadocio, a lustful knight who fails in his attempt to seduce Belle Phoebe, who stands for the Queen. And the whole farcical affair was also the stuff of popular ballads.
The Monsieur came himself from France, on purpose for to woo her, and yet she lived and died a maid, do what he would to her.
Marvellous ditty. Whenever and wherever it was that the Queen witnessed a performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream, none of these dangerously teasing allusions could have been lost on her. As early as 1564, the Spanish ambassador reported back to Philip of Spain that he and Elizabeth had witnessed a comedy together, of which he said, "I should not have understood much of it if the Queen had not interpreted as she told me she would do. They generally deal with marriage in the comedies." And a year later, in March 1565, the same ambassador told of witnessing a debate in which Juno argued in favour of marriage and Diana argued in favour of chastity. After Jupiter cast his vote in favour of marriage, the Queen turned to Da Silva and remarked, "This is all against me." 30 years later, Lord Burleigh wrote of Elizabeth in a letter, "I think never a lady besides her, nor a decipherer in the court, would have dissolved the figure explicated in allegory to have found the sense as Her Majesty hath done." So the question is, how could the author dare to do this and get away with it? In 1579, John Stubbs had written a pamphlet opposing the match entitled "The Discovery of a Gaping Gulf Whereunto England is like to be swallowed by another French marriage, if the Lord forbid not the banns, by letting Her Majesty see the sin and punishment thereof." Short title. Undiplomatically, he described the proposed wedding as a contrary coupling, an immoral union, an uneven yoking of the clean ox to the unclean ass, a thing forbidden in law. Stubbs referred to Alençon as an imp of the crown of France. For his pains, he and the publisher both had their right hands chopped off. Thank you.
Ends abruptly there. there is the Duke d'Alençon in the portrait sent to Queen Elizabeth I, and there he is more in reality as a rather grumpy little lad. And on the right, that is a bit of Guise propaganda against him with his very bulbous and scarred nose. If you look, it's detailed.
Did you see that even in the first line you quoted, my mistress is in love with a monster? Monster, monsieur.
Yes.
That even there it's...
It's flagged up.
Doesn't it?
Yes, yes. And sorry, I should have said something in the introduction. All I'll say at this point is there are 100 letters that have survived of the correspondence, this remarkable and extraordinary correspondence between Queen Elizabeth I and Alençon. So it's a rich background to the play.